The moment her hands touched the crying woman's face, the entire train went silent. A black single mother just broke an unspoken rule, comforting the Korean mafia boss's mother in public. His eyes locked on her and everyone knew. She was either about to be protected or eliminated. If you believe in showing up for people when the world turns away, hit that subscribe button for Ebony and Pearl stories. Let's prove compassion isn't dead. Not the quiet kind of crying. The kind that carves itself into the bones of everyone nearby. The kind that makes strangers grip their armrests tighter, avert their eyes, and pretend the grief radiating through the cabin isn't suffocating them all. Raw, guttural sobs echoed off the train's metal walls, each one seeming to stretch longer than the last. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young couple whispered to each other, then went silent. A businessman turned up his headphones. A teenager stared harder at her phone screen. No one moved to help. Not when they saw the man standing beside her. Do Minjun gripped the overhead rail with one hand, his knuckles white against the polished steel. He was tall, imposing in a way that had nothing to do with height and everything to do with presence. His tailored black suit fit like it had been sculpted onto his frame, the kind of expensive simplicity that screamed power without needing to shout. A crisp white shirt, no tie. Traditional Korean tattoos crawled up his neck from beneath his collar. Dragons coiled around lotus blossoms, phoenixes rising from ash, symbols of power and rebirth that marked him as someone who didn't just command respect. He took it. His jaw was clenched so tight it could shatter bone. Dark eyes fixed forward with the kind of dangerous stillness that warned of violence barely restrained. Every line of his body radiated control, except for the slight tremor in his free hand that he kept trying to hide. The other Korean passengers on the train wouldn't even glance in his direction. When his eyes swept across the cabin, people found sudden interest in the floor, the windows, anywhere but his face. Near the rear door, a man in a dark jacket stood with military precision, earpiece visible, hand resting casually near his side in a way that suggested a weapon underneath. Do Minjun could silence boardrooms, broker peace between warring families, make problems disappear with a single phone call. But he couldn't stop his mother's pain. And that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. Do Yuna sat hunched on the bench seat, her 73-year-old frame shaking with each sob. Her hands trembled so violently that the white silk handkerchief embroidered with cranes, a gift from her late husband, kept slipping through her fingers. Each time it fell, she whispered frantic apologies in Korean, her voice cracking under the weight of something older and deeper than grief. She'd been strong her entire life. Survived the Korean War as a child, watching her village burn. Crossed an ocean with nothing but a suitcase and prayers. Buried her husband with dignity and raised a son alone, shaping him with discipline carved from steel and sacrifice. But today, on a crowded city train rattling toward nowhere important, all that strength had finally run out. Minjun murmured in Korean, lowering his voice to just above a whisper. Please. We're almost there. Just hold on a little longer. Yuna shook her head, tears streaming down her deeply lined face. I can't breathe, Minjuna. Everywhere I look, I see your appa. I hear the ghosts of everything we've done. I'm so tired of being strong. Her words hit him like physical blows. I'm sorry, she continued, her voice breaking. Sorry for what you had to become. Sorry I couldn't protect you from this world. Sorry I... Stop. Minjun's voice was rough. You have nothing to apologize for. But Yuna wasn't listening anymore. She was somewhere else, lost in memories of war-torn streets, of a husband's funeral, of watching her son's innocence harden into something cold and lethal because the world demanded it. The handkerchief slipped from her fingers again. A train attendant approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance from Minjun. Sir, is there anything? No. Minjun's response was immediate, sharp as a blade. Cultural pride warred with desperation in his chest. To accept help was to show weakness. To show weakness in his world was to invite death. The attendant retreated quickly. For rows away, Marlo Kensington heard every sob and felt her chest tighten with recognition. She knew that sound intimately. Marlo was 32 years old, bone-tired in ways that went deeper than missed sleep. Her worn gray sweater had a small stain on the sleeve from this morning's rushed breakfast with her 15-year-old son. A son who lately pretended he didn't need her, who'd started slamming doors and hiding behind headphones because grief had taught him that caring too much only led to pain. It had been 14 months since Marlowe's own mother died. 14 months of working double shifts as a nursing assistant, because life didn't pause for grief. 14 months of being strong for her son, of swallowing her pain because there was no time to fall apart. No luxury of breaking down on a train while strangers watched. She'd cried exactly like that once. Alone in her car after a particularly brutal shift. The same desperate, bone-deep sobs that came from holding on too long. From being strong when your soul was begging to rest. Marlowe watched the older Korean woman's shoulders shake. Watched the expensive handkerchief flutter to the floor for the third time. Watched the dangerous man standing guard try and fail to comfort her. And she saw herself. Saw her mother. Saw every woman who'd ever been told to be strong when what they really needed was permission to break. The handkerchief lay on the floor between them. Delicate white silk against dirty subway tile. The train jolted over a rough patch of track. Marlowe's hands gripped her knees. Don't get involved. You don't know these people. Look at him, he's dangerous. This isn't your problem. But the woman's crying grew harder, more desperate, and Marlowe felt something crack open inside her chest. A year of her own unprocessed grief. A year of watching her son suffer in silence. A year of being told that strength meant suffering alone. Before fear could talk her out of it, she stood. The movement felt slow and fast at the same time. Her worn sneakers carried her across the aisle. Hyper-aware of every eye suddenly tracking her movement. The man's gaze snapped to her instantly, sharp, assessing, lethal as a loaded gun. His eyes asked a single question. What are you doing? Marlowe ignored the warning written across his face. Ignored the bodyguard who shifted position near the door. Ignored every instinct screaming at her to sit back down and mind her business. She crouched low in front of the crying woman and gently picked up the fallen handkerchief. Their eyes met. And the entire train seemed to hold its breath. If you can't stand watching people suffer alone while the world looks away, drop a subscribe and comment what time you're watching this. Only the cold-hearted would scroll past this story. And I know that's not you. Marlowe held the delicate handkerchief in her hands. Its silk cool against her fingertips. Around her, she could feel the shift. Passengers leaning forward in their seats. Whispers dying mid-breath. The air itself seeming to thicken with tension. The bodyguard by the door straightened. His hand moving fractionally closer to his jacket. Minjun's entire body went rigid, every muscle coiling tight. His hand released the overhead rail and moved toward Marlowe in what might have been a warning or a threat. But Marlowe wasn't looking at him. She stayed crouched low, making herself smaller, non-threatening. Not towering over this grieving woman, but meeting her at eye level. The way you would with a frightened child or a wounded bird. Ma'am, Marlowe said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. You dropped this. She held out the handkerchief. Do Yuna stared at her through tear-blurred eyes, confusion and pain warring across her lined face. Her hands trembled in her lap, fingers twisted together so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Marlowe didn't wait for permission. She reached out slowly, deliberately, and gently covered Yuna's shaking hands with her own. The reaction was immediate. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. A Korean woman 3 rows up whispered urgently to her companion in shocked tones. The businessman yanked out his headphones, staring openly now. Even the teenager lowered her phone. A black woman, touching a Korean elder. Without invitation. Without introduction. In full view of everyone. Cultural boundaries weren't just being crossed, they were being shattered. Minjun took one sharp step forward, his voice low and dangerous. What do you think you're? But his mother's sob cut him off. Yuna looked down at Marlowe's hands, brown skin against her own weathered, pale fingers, and something inside her broke open completely. Not fractured. Not damaged. Released. She collapsed forward into Marlowe's arms like a dam finally giving way. Marlowe caught her instinctively, wrapping her arms around the older woman's trembling frame and pulling her close. Yuna buried her face in Marlowe's shoulder, her sobs deepening, becoming raw and primal. The kind of crying that comes from decades of holding everything together when you want it to fall apart. The train swayed, and Marlowe rocked gently with emotion, one hand cradling the back of Yuna's head, the other rubbing slow circles on her back. Without thinking, Marlowe began to hum. Low and soft. An old lullaby her own mother used to sing when Marlowe was small, when the world felt too big and scary. Not Korean. Not English. Just sound. Just comfort. Just the universal language of someone saying, You're not alone. I've got you. It's okay to break. The atmosphere in the train car shifted like a physical thing. The tension didn't disappear, but it transformed, from voyeuristic discomfort to something almost sacred. Strangers witnessing a moment too intimate, too real to interrupt. Yuna's sobs began to soften. Her breathing, which had been coming in desperate, uneven gasps, started to slow and deepen. The rigid terror in her shoulders eased. Minjun stood frozen 3 feet away, his carefully constructed armor cracking down the middle. He saw his mother, his strong, unbreakable mother who had raised him through poverty and violence, who had never once asked for help, who had taught him that weakness was death, surrendering completely to a stranger's kindness. And suddenly he was 7 years old again. Sitting in a cold apartment, his mother's arms around him after older boys had beaten him bloody for being different. Her voice humming the same way this stranger was humming now. You'll be strong one day, Minjuna. Strong enough to protect us both. But tonight you can cry. He'd become that strength. Built an empire on it. Turned himself into something cold and lethal because the world demanded it, and his mother needed it. But he'd forgotten how to offer comfort. How to receive it. How to simply be with someone's pain instead of trying to fix or control it. This stranger was doing what he couldn't. For the first time in 20 years, Do Minjun surrendered. He didn't stop her. Didn't interfere. Didn't let pride or fear or reputation dictate his actions. He simply watched his mother rest. After what felt like an eternity and a heartbeat all at once, Yuna pulled back slowly. Her face was puffy and tear-stained, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. She cupped Marlowe's face with both hands, studying her like she was memorizing every feature. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion but steady. You touched my soul, she said in Korean, then switched to accented English. Do you know what that means? Marlowe shook her head, overwhelmed and confused. I didn't want you to be alone. Yuna's grip on her face tightened, almost desperate. She turned to her son, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of ancient tradition. She has crossed a line of protection, Yuna said, her voice ringing clear through the silent cabin. In our traditions, a woman who steadies the heart of a family matriarch, who offers comfort in public grief, becomes bound to that family. Protected. Honored. She paused, and her next words fell like stones into still water. Invisible to every enemy we have. The color drained from Minjun's face. His mind raced through the implications. His world wasn't just business. It was blood feuds stretching back generations, rival families watching for any sign of weakness, enemies who would exploit any opening. And this woman, this kind stranger who'd shown his mother more compassion in 5 minutes than most people showed in a lifetime, had just painted a target on her own back. Because in his world, nothing was sacred. Not grief. Not kindness. Not even the ancient bonds of protection and honor. His enemies would see this. They always did. And they would use it. Marlowe Kensington had no idea what she'd just walked into. No idea that the simple act of comforting a crying woman on a train had bound her fate to one of the most dangerous families on the West Coast. But Minjun knew. And as he met his mother's eyes, clear and certain despite her tears, he realized something that chilled him to his core. There was no taking it back. Marlowe was visible now, whether she wanted to be or not. If you believe kindness shouldn't come with a death sentence, hit subscribe to Ebony and Pearl Stories and comment, compassion over cruelty. Only the heartless would punish someone for caring. And we're not about to let that slide. 2 days later, Marlowe stood at her apartment window, staring down at the black Mercedes that had been idling across the street for the past 15 minutes. She hadn't heard from the Korean woman, or her terrifying son since the train. Had almost convinced herself it was over, just a strange, emotionally charged moment between strangers that would fade into memory like everything else. Then the messages started. First, a text from an unknown number. The kindness you showed has been noted. Then yesterday morning, a delivery of expensive Korean tea she definitely hadn't ordered, with a card that simply read, for comfort. Dei. And now this car. Sleek, expensive, with tinted windows that refused to reveal who was inside. Marlowe's 15-year-old son Dennis appeared beside her, basketball under one arm. Mom, that car's been out there forever. You think we should call someone? No, Marlowe said quickly. Too quickly. It's probably nothing. But her hands were shaking. The rear door of the Mercedes opened. Do Minjun stepped out, and even from 3 stories up, Marlo could feel the weight of his presence. He looked up directly at her window, and their eyes met. He nodded once. An invitation. Or a command. Marlo couldn't tell which. Stay inside, she told Dennis, grabbing her jacket. I'll be right back. Mom, 10 minutes. I promise. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. By the time she pushed through the building's front door, Minjun was standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, looking impossibly out of place in this worn-down neighborhood with his expensive suit and dangerous eyes. Miss Kensington, he said, his voice formal. We need to talk. About what? Marlo crossed her arms, defensive. I helped your mother. That's it. I don't want anything from you. I know. Something flickered across his face. Respect, maybe, or regret. That's the problem. He gestured to the car. Please. 5 minutes. I owe you an explanation. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Marlo got in. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Minjun slid in beside her, and the driver pulled away from the curb without being told. Where are we going? Marlo demanded. Nowhere. Just driving. More private this way. He turned to face her fully. What you did on that train, it was noticed. By who? People in my world. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm not a legitimate businessman, Miss Kensington. I run operations that exist in shadows. My family has enemies, powerful ones who've been looking for leverage against us for years. Marlo's blood ran cold. What does that have to do with me? My mother has been ill. Dementia early stages. Our rivals know this. They've been using it, spreading rumors that I'm distracted, weak, that my family is vulnerable. His jaw tightened. When you comforted her publicly, bound yourself to her through that act of protection, you became part of a very old, very serious tradition. One my enemies will exploit. That's insane, Marlo whispered. She was crying. I helped her. That's it. In your world, yes. In mine. He met her eyes. In mine, compassion is currency. And you just made yourself valuable. The car turned down a quiet street. Marlo's mind raced, thinking of Dennis, of their small life, of how desperately she'd worked to keep them safe and invisible after his father left. I didn't ask for this, she said, her voice breaking. I have a son. I can't. I know. Minjun's voice softened fractionally. Which is why I'm here. To warn you. And to offer protection. I don't want your protection. I want to be left alone. It's too late for that. Before Marlo could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. What? Marlo asked. He showed her the screen. A photo of her apartment building. Taken today. From ground level. The message beneath it read, she doesn't belong to you yet. Send her away, or we'll do it for you. Marlo felt sick. The car stopped outside a small house in a better neighborhood. Minjun opened the door. Gulme. My mother wants to see you. I should go home. Miss Kensington. His voice was gentle but firm. You're being watched. Right now, the safest place for you is with us. Inside, the house was modest but elegant. Do Yuna sat in the living room, looking stronger than she had on the train. When she saw Marlo, her face lit up. You came, she said, standing slowly. I wasn't sure you would. Your son didn't give me much choice. Yuna gestured for Minjun to leave them. He hesitated, then withdrew, though Marlo could feel him hovering just outside the door. I need to ask you something, Yuna said, taking Marlo's hands. And I need you to understand. This is a choice, not a demand. What is it? Stay. Not here, not forever. Just present. Visible. Let them see that our family has honor still, that we protect those who show us kindness. Her grip tightened. You didn't ask for this burden. But you carry it now. And I'm asking, begging, that you let us carry it with you. I have a son, Marlo said, tears burning her eyes. I can't put him in danger. Then we protect you both. From the other room, Minjun's phone rang. Marlo heard his sharp intake of breath, then low, rapid Korean. When he appeared in the doorway, his face was carved from stone. They're demanding an answer, he said quietly. They want you handed over by midnight or they'll. He cut himself off, glancing at his mother. Or they'll what? Marlo demanded. Minjun's eyes met hers, and she saw something she hadn't seen before. Fear. Or they'll expose my mother's condition publicly. Use it to force me out. And they'll make sure you disappear in the chaos. If you can't stand bullies who punish innocent people for showing kindness, hit subscribe to Ebony and Pearl Stories and comment, protect the helpers. Only cowards threaten the compassionate, and we're not about to let them win. That night, Marlo sat in the guest room Minjun had arranged for her, staring at her phone. Dennis was safe at his best friend's house for a sleepover. She'd made sure of that before agreeing to stay. He didn't know about any of this. Didn't know his mother had somehow become collateral damage in a war she didn't understand. The deadline was 9 hours away. Marlo looked around the room. Expensive furniture, soft lighting, a level of comfort she'd never experienced. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. And staying here was only going to get someone killed. Maybe her. Maybe Yuna. Maybe even Minjun. She couldn't let that happen. At 2 a.m., Marlo quietly packed her small overnight bag. She pulled out the notepad on the desk and wrote quickly, her handwriting shaky. I'm sorry. This is my choice. Tell your mother I'm grateful for her kindness. Please keep Dennis safe. He doesn't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. She folded the note, left it on the pillow, and slipped out of the room. The house was silent. The bodyguard Minjun had stationed outside her door had stepped away, probably to use the bathroom or grab coffee. Marlo moved quickly down the stairs, her heart hammering. She made it to the front door, opened it, stepped outside into the cool night air. And that's when everything went wrong. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Strong arms locked around her waist. She tried to scream, tried to fight, but there were too many of them. 3 men in dark clothes, moving with brutal efficiency. A cloth pressed against her nose and mouth. Chemical smell. Sweet and sickening. Her vision blurred. The last thing she heard was tires screeching and Minjun's voice roaring her name from inside the house. Then nothing. Marlo woke to the smell of motor oil and rust. Her head pounded. Her wrists ached, zip-tied behind her back, cutting into her skin. She was sitting in a metal chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Men stood around the perimeter, armed, watching. And in front of her, sitting casually on a crate, was a man in an expensive suit that somehow looked cheaper than Minjun's. Older, maybe 50, with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Miss Kensington, he said in accented English. Am Kanyahao. And you've become quite the problem. Marlo's throat was dry. I don't know what you want from me. Nothing. He stood, circling her slowly. You're just a message. A lesson about what happens when Do Minjun lets sentiment make him weak. He thinks compassion is strength? I'll show him what real strength looks like. He'll kill you, Marlo said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Kong laughed. He'll try. But first he'll have to choose, you or everything he's built. His territory. His reputation. His power. He leaned in close. Men like us don't sacrifice empires for strangers. He'll let you go. Then why am I here? Because I want to watch him try to be a hero, Kong said coldly. And fail. The warehouse door burst open with a crash that echoed like thunder. But instead of an army, instead of bodyguards and weapons, and the overwhelming force everyone expected, Do Minjun walked in alone. No guards. No guns visible. Just him in his black suit, hands at his sides, walking steadily toward the center of the warehouse like he was entering a boardroom instead of a death trap. Kang's men raised their weapons instantly. Hold, Kong commanded, genuinely shocked. You came alone? Minjun stopped 10 feet away from Marlo. His eyes met hers briefly, checking if she was hurt, then locked onto Kong. You wanted to negotiate, Minjun said, his voice eerily calm. So let's negotiate. Kong laughed, but it sounded uncertain now. Where are your men? Your weapons? Did you really think? I brought something better than weapons, Minjun interrupted. I brought an offer. I'm listening. Minjun's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. My territory on the West Coast. The shipping routes through the port of Los Angeles. The protection rackets in Koreatown. The political contacts I've spent 15 years building. He paused. All of it. Yours. Gasps rippled through Kang's men. Even Marlowe stared at him in disbelief. Kang's smile faded. You're serious? My power, Minjun continued, each word costing him something. My reputation. Everything I've built, everything my family died to protect. His voice cracked slightly. And if that's not enough, take my name. Let it be known that I surrendered. That I knelt. All that. Kang stepped closer, studying Minjun's face like he was trying to find the trap. For her. For her, Minjun said without hesitation. And for my mother's peace. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kang circled Minjun slowly, and when he spoke, his voice dripped with contempt. You've made yourself small. Weak. All because one woman showed your crying mother some kindness on a train. Yes. Your enemies will hear about this. They'll smell blood in the water. I know. Kang stopped directly in front of him, studying him like a specimen under glass. Then he looked at Marlowe, then back at Minjun. This is what your compassion has cost you, Kang said softly. Everything. He snapped his fingers. Two of his men stepped forward, guns drawn, moving toward Marlowe. And Do Minjun, the most feared man on the West Coast, the one who'd built an empire on ruthlessness and control, closed his eyes, surrendered, and waited for Kang to decide if one act of kindness was worth more than power itself. If you're disgusted by people who exploit kindness and punish compassion, hit subscribe to Ebony and Pearl Stories and comment love is stronger. Only the cruel side with men like Kang, and that's not us. Kang's men were 2 steps from Marlowe when a voice cut through the warehouse like a blade. Enough. Everyone froze. The voice was calm, steady, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need to shout to command a room. Do Yuna walked through the warehouse entrance, her posture straight despite her 73 years. She wore traditional Korean hanbok, deep purple silk embroidered with cranes, and moved with the unhurried grace of someone who'd survived wars and had nothing left to fear. Behind her, no guards, no weapons, just presence. Kang's face twitched with uncertainty. Mrs. Do, this doesn't concern. It concerns me entirely, Yuna interrupted, her accented English clear and precise. Since you're using my son's love for me as a weapon. She walked past Kang's armed men like they were children playing pretend. None of them moved to stop her. Something about her, the way she carried grief and dignity in equal measure, made violence feel obscene in her presence. She stopped in front of Kang. You think my son is weak because he would trade power for a life, she said quietly. You think compassion makes him small. It does, Kang said, but his voice had lost its edge. No. Yuna's eyes hardened. I did not raise my son to rule through fear alone. I raised him to know when to hold power, she paused, and when to let it go. She turned to Minjun, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the warehouse like a benediction. Minjuna. Show them what real strength looks like. Minjun met his mother's eyes, saw her permission, her release, and then, in front of his greatest enemy, in front of armed men who'd spent years fearing his name, Do Minjun knelt. Not in defeat, not in surrender, in choice. He bowed his head, palms flat on the concrete floor, and spoke in Korean. I choose love over power, humanity over empire, my mother's peace over my pride. The gesture was ancient, final, a public destruction of everything he'd built his identity on. Kang stared, his face cycling through shock, contempt, and something that looked disturbingly like fear. Because in their world, a man who knelt in public was finished. But a man who chose to kneel, who made himself vulnerable by choice rather than force, that was something else entirely. That was power they didn't understand. Yuna looked at Kang. You wanted to expose my illness? Do it. You wanted to destroy my son's reputation? You've succeeded. She gestured to Minjun, still kneeling. He is destroyed. Weak. Exactly as you hoped. She stepped closer to Kang, and her voice dropped to something cold and final. But he's also free. And you? You're still a prisoner of the very power that owns you. Kang's hands trembled. His men shifted uncomfortably, waiting for orders that didn't come. Because what could he do? Kill them anyway? That would make him the monster, not the victor. Take the territory? It would be meaningless now. Word would spread that he'd needed threats and kidnapping to claim what Minjun offered freely. He'd already lost. Cut her loose, Kang said finally, his voice tight. His men hesitated. Now. They freed Marlowe's restraints. She stumbled forward, and Minjun rose instantly, catching her before she could fall. Kong watched them, the kneeling mafia boss, the crying mother, the stranger who'd started all of this with one act of compassion. And something in his expression cracked. "Get out," he said hoarsely. "All of you. Before I change my mind." They left in silence. 6 months later, the train rattled along its familiar route, morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Marlowe sat in the same seat she'd occupied that day, a book open in her lap but ignored. Beside her, Do Yuna smiled as she pointed out something through the window, a flowering tree they both remembered from last week's ride. No tears now. No shaking hands. Just peace. Minjun had kept his word. Within 3 months, he'd systematically dismantled his empire, liquidated operations, severed ties, walked away from the shadows he'd ruled for 2 decades. The power brokers whispered about his weakness. His rivals carved up his former territory. He didn't care. He'd bought a legitimate security consulting firm. Started over. Some days he still carried the weight of what he'd been. But more and more, he was learning to carry who he was becoming instead. Yuna had moved into a small house filled with light, where she spent her days gardening and teaching Marlowe's son Dennis conversational Korean. Her dementia symptoms had stabilized, maybe because the stress had lifted, or maybe because she'd finally given herself permission to be human instead of indestructible. Marlowe and Dennis lived 2 blocks away now. Safe. Visible. Belonging. The train slowed for their stop. "Same time next week?" Yuna asked, squeezing Marlowe's hand. "Same time," Marlowe confirmed, smiling. As they stood to leave, a young mother across the aisle struggled with a crying toddler. Passengers averted their eyes, uncomfortable. Marlowe caught Yuna's knowing look. Without hesitation, they both moved toward the woman. "Would you like some help?" Marlowe asked gently. The young mother's eyes filled with grateful tears. "Please." And as Marlowe lifted the child and Yuna offered soothing words in Korean, the train car seemed to exhale, reminded again of what the world looked like when compassion chose to show up instead of turn away. Because once upon a time, a black single mother did the unthinkable. She chose kindness when the world demanded fear. And in doing so, she didn't just save one grieving woman on a train. She saved them all. If you believe the world needs more people who choose compassion over power, hit subscribe to Ebony and Pearl Stories and comment "Kindness wins." Only the heartless side with people like Kong who punish helpers. And we refuse to be that kind of people.